Maura Murray was 21 years old when she crashed her car. By the time police arrived to the scene, her car was locked. And Maura had vanished into thin air. I'm Jessie Stevens, and this is True Crime Conversations, a Mamma Mia podcast exploring the world's most notorious crimes by speaking to the people who know the most about them. In this episode, I'm joined by James Renner, author of True Crime Addict: How I Lost Myself in the Mysterious Disappearance of Maura Murray. James's obsession with true crime has consumed his life, and the case of missing New Hampshire woman Maura Murray is the one that still haunts him to this day. So I wanted to start with Butch Atwood, who's a local bus driver, and he was driving home on February 9th, 2004, and he sees a broken down car on the side of the road. What does he decide to do?
He decides to stop. He's actually driving a shorter bus. It's not like a full-size school bus. It's a small bus, and he had just taken kids to a ski trip. So he's coming home. He lives pretty much directly across the street from where the crash happened, just a little further down. And he comes around the corner, sees the crash, opens the door, and says to Maura, "Would you like me to call the police?" And she says, "Oh, no, please don't call the police. I've called AAA. They're on their way. It's taken care of." And he knows that's a lie, because even to this day, you can't get cell phone service up there. And so he goes home, and he can see the accident from his driveway, backs his bus in, then goes to his wife and tells her what happened. She calls the police. She calls 911. Sometime between the call to 911 and the first responding officer, and we're talking of a window between 3 and 7 minutes, Maura Murray disappears, never to be seen again.
A local school bus driver told police he saw a woman standing outside the car.
She said she was shaken up. I couldn't see any blood on her face. And she was shaking like this. I says, okay, I'm going to go call the police.
An officer arrived 19 minutes later, finding the car locked and no one around.
How does he describe the woman that he encountered, that he had that sort of brief interaction with?
That's a good question. I think what happens is later, I think he describes her not in great detail, just that it was a woman, dark hair, I spoke to her, this was it. And then later he's shown a picture and identifies her as Maura Murray.
Did she seem distressed or injured or anything?
It's hard to tell because Butch only gave so many interviews, and he's passed on. By the time I started investigating this case, he had passed and he had died. So I was never able to have that conversation directly with him. We have to go with what's been reported, and there have been conflicting reports on that. Some say that, he said she appeared drunk. Other people say he didn't say that. So it's hard to tell.
And when the police eventually do arrive those few minutes afterwards, what kind of scene do they find?
So they find that they arrive, the car's locked. The responding officer, a guy named Cecil Smith, smells alcohol. And inside the car is a box of wine that has been opened, and during the accident, it appears as though the wine spilled and splashed onto the ceiling. And she had a Coke can that she might have mixed alcohol with as well. So by every indication, it appeared that she had been drinking and driving. And that's why when they first responded, they treated it not as a homicide or a missing persons case, but they treated it as a DUI walkaway. And that's not out of the norm, not even for that little turn where she got into her accident. That happens 4 or 5 times a year. Somebody had a little too much to drink. They didn't see the turn. It's 90 degrees. They lose control. sometimes they'll walk away so they don't get charged with a DUI, and they'll show up a day later to get it out of impound.
Yeah, and it would also explain why she didn't want Butch to be calling the police, because then obviously they come and they recognise that she's drunk. I can see how that story would sort of make sense. Where was she heading in the first place? Was she going to a party or something? Why did she have all that alcohol?
Well, that's the big question. And that's actually why I decided that I would write a book about that case, that question right there. Because I realized when I heard about this case that this is unique. This mystery is unique because it's actually two mysteries wrapped around each other. What happened to Maura Murray, but also what was she doing up there in the first place? And I figured if I could get the answer to that question, I'd get closer to the answer to what happened to her. And I spent 5 years researching this case, spoke to pretty much everybody close to her that knew her, and I came to the conclusion that she was most likely traveling with somebody else, that there was a tandem driver in another vehicle ahead of her. She got into the accident. They saw that she was no longer behind them and eventually turned around and picked her up. I think it's quite possible she made it to a cabin that night or a condo, whatever their destination was, and decided to stick it out there for the week. And just, she had no idea she became a national missing persons case. And I think the friend probably ended up going back to UMass. And then, so the question then is, what happened after that? Did somebody find her and kill her, or did she start another life? And the more time goes by, I think the more likely it is that somebody caught up with her and killed her. But I think we've been looking at the wrong day and the wrong place to find out what happened to Maura Murray.
So what makes you think that she got into another car as opposed to just walked off? What's the evidence that she didn't just walk off?
There's a lot of circumstantial evidence. As far as evidence showing that she didn't just walk off, there were no footprints leading into the woods. So it was winter time there in New Hampshire, February, and it had snowed earlier that day, and it didn't snow again for several days. So when they really started the search on Wednesday morning, conditions were still great to look for footprints, and there were no footprints going into the woods. They had a dog come out that followed her scent to the middle of the road as if she got into a car. And then you look at some of the other circumstantial evidence, the fact that she bought way too much booze for just one person, bottles of alcohol, this box of wine. She was also looking for condos that had more than one bedroom. The condo that she called was a 2-bedroom condo, and she passed several hotels that had cheap single rooms. So there was a hotel about 3 miles behind her that she had passed called the Nootka Lodge, and she could have got a single room there if all she was looking was for a place to stay. She could have got a single room for like $70 that night. Then there's also this, what I believe is a very credible sighting at a local grocery store about an hour before the accident. And a cashier swears that she saw Maura with 2 other young women, and they were trying to buy a little more booze and some cigarettes. And they had out-of-state license, which is why she remembered her later. Put all that together, and I think it makes a pretty good case that she was traveling in tandem with another driver, a friend of hers.
In that case, so if she goes missing and her family becomes increasingly distressed, why do you think that those friends that were with her have never come forward and identified themselves?
First of all, I think it's possible that they did. It's possible that they went to the family and told them. The family's been very, very secretive. Maura had a lot of skeletons in the closet that they didn't want out on the media, because they thought that if we knew the type of person she really was, that we wouldn't look as hard for her. But Maura is just, everybody is complicated. Everybody has skeletons in the closet. I don't think it would have made any big deal if they had publicized the trouble that she was in at the time that she disappeared. So it's possible the friends did say that, but it's also possible they didn't for a couple reasons. One, if I'm right, if it was a friend, if it was in tandem, they left Maura there and returned to UMass. They don't know what happened. They don't know if Maura went on and is trying to live a life, and finding peace somewhere, and maybe they don't want to get her in trouble. Maybe they're fearful that whoever killed Maura would want to do them harm. There's one friend in particular that if anybody would know what happened that night, it was her. And this friend's father had gone to prison for many years. And so she is inherently distrustful of police. So, of course, she wouldn't tell if she knew. It could be any of those reasons.
I mean, we've been going through the woods, all her favorite spots, and we're just looking for somebody just to come out and say something.
Kathleen Murray has spent the last 3 days searching for her sister, 21-year-old Maura. The UMass college student hasn't been seen since Monday night when she crashed her 96 black Saturn on Route 12 in Woodsville. Police arrived to find the car, but no sign of her. One witness reported seeing Maura looking impaired.
She might be afraid that she's going to get in trouble, but we just want to let her know that it's fine. We just want her to come home.
So let's talk about some of those skeletons that were in Maura's closet. What sort of situation was she in that day? So she had a long-term boyfriend named Bill, but that was quite complicated, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Bill Rausch, she had met when she was a student at West Point. And West Point's a very prestigious military university in the United States, very hard to get into. Maura had gone there for a couple years, and she was about to get kicked out when she withdrew and went to UMass. And the reason she was about to get kicked out is she stole from Fort Knox. She stole from the most secure facility in the United States. And it's not like she stole gold bullion or anything like that. She stole like $4 worth of makeup from the commissary. So that to me is a cry for help. Mm. But she got caught and they were going to kick her out. So she withdrew and went to UMass. That's how she ended up there. And at the time of her disappearance, she was in trouble for credit card fraud and identity theft. She had stolen credit card numbers from girls that lived in the dorm with her, and she had used it to order food late at night. Nothing big, but she got caught again, and she went in front of a judge, and the judge said, if you can stay out of trouble for 6 months, we'll wipe this off your record. It'll be like it never happened. And that was in November. And then in February, 2 days before her disappearance, she wrecked her father's car right near the campus of UMass, and she would have been charged with, at the very least, failure to control her vehicle or a reckless op. And I think she realized that she was never going to be a nurse, that those charges were going to come back. And I think that's kind of what set things in motion for her and led her into the White Mountains.
And so in those days before, you've mentioned the car incident that she had. So she'd borrowed her father's car and she'd gone to a party or something, hadn't she?
Yes. There's a lot of weird stuff that happens that weekend before her disappearance. She goes missing on a Monday, and we're talking about Saturday, 2 days before. Her father comes to visit her, and her father is a strange guy. His name's Fred Murray. On the way to the university, he stops at 8 different ATMs and withdraws $500 in cash from each one. And he says that that's money that they were going to use to buy her a new car. But they never do buy that car. They go out to dinner, and then he lets her take his car to a party on campus. She drops him off at his hotel, and she goes back to this party on campus. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, this is Saturday night, Sunday morning, she turns to her friends and says, hey, I got to talk to my dad. They're like, what do you have to talk to your dad about at 3 o'clock in the morning? Are you kidding me? You can't drive anywhere. You've been drinking, she's like, "But no, it's important. I got to talk to him." So she gets in his car, starts heading towards his motel. At least this is the story. And she, on the way there, crashes into a guardrail. And the police are called. The police respond. And they end up sending her home in a tow truck. And there's a lot of damage to the car. So she ends up getting into her father's hotel room, I think around 4 or 5 in the morning. And there's conflicting stories about, what happened next. And obviously her father was upset. So yeah, there's a lot that's going on that weekend leading up. And whether or not it has anything to do with her disappearance, to this day, I'm not sure. But there's a lot we don't know about that party that she went to. This party was in the dorm of this girl named Sarah. And Maura's best friend at the university was Kate. And Kate was there with the party. And you go to Kate and you say, "Who else was at that party?" Because it could be important. And she says, "Oh, I don't remember. I can't remember anything. It's been so long ago." But the police went and asked her those same questions just a couple days after the disappearance. And even way back then, she was uncooperative. She told them she couldn't remember who was there. And only later do we find out that Maura hooked up with Kate's cousin at this party. And, while she was with Bill, and they were cheating on each other. It was, and we're talking about a relationship with a couple 21, 22-year-olds. So this stuff happens all the time. Whether or not it has to do with her disappearance is the big question.
Kate and Sarah both told me that they do not know why Maura left. I don't know what to make of Sarah. Sarah had 3 friends. Her cousin was there, some guy who brought 2 friends at the dorm party. And incidentally, I only talked to Sarah once. I called her. She told me I was asleep the whole time, Mr. Murray, and I don't have any idea what happened. So if she knows, she's not telling me. That story sounds unlikely, that she's asleep the whole time.
And that wasn't the only person that she cheated on Bill with, was it? Because there was a sports coach.
So she did have an affair with her track coach. And, a lot of people are like, well, you're using the word affair. Was it really an affair? Neither one of them were married. But Maura was with Bill during this relationship, or at least part of this relationship. And I think it does qualify as an affair. So this track coach, he was older. They had a pretty lengthy relationship, actually. And he was, I contacted him. He was very honest about it. Said, yeah, we were together. And it was clear to me that he cared a lot for her. And he said a couple interesting things to me. He said, one, she never mentioned her father. They were supposedly very, very close. She never once mentioned Fred. In fact, he thought it was possible her father wasn't even alive anymore. She talked about Bill in a way that led him to believe that Bill was abusive and controlling, and she kind of wanted to be away from him. So that relationship continued, and then Maura broke it off. And then they saw each other again in November, around the time that she got in trouble with the law out there. And that was kind of the last that they were really an item. But the interesting thing about that track coach, a couple things about him. One, he was a member of the Outing Club at UMass. And the Outing Club owned a cabin in Bethlehem, New Hampshire. And if you plot a course from UMass to Bethlehem, New Hampshire, you would have gone the route that Maura would have gone. And Maura and Hossein, the track coach, they talked about vacationing up in the White Mountains, going there together. And they could have stayed at that Outing Club cabin. So she may have known the code to get in and had known that cabin was empty during the week. So she had a free place to stay. So I think it's quite possible that that's where she ended up that night. Another thing about Hossein is he's the only one that has said that Maura had this plan in the back of her head that she wanted to disappear and start a new life somewhere. She had talked about this, about running away. And he always thought she meant Mexico. So that's what he thought when she disappeared, that was a possibility.
So what we've got is that obviously her relationship with Bill wasn't great. It sounds like it could have been slightly toxic and they were cheating on each other. Then she goes to that party. She crashes the car. There's obviously all this damage done. In the hours leading up to her disappearance, what do we know happens? So she goes and she buys some alcohol. What's going on with her study and stuff? Like, does she let them know that she's not going to be around?
Yes, so the first thing she does is send an email to her professors. And she says, there's been a death in the family. Hold my work till the end of the week. That was a lie, of course. There's no death in the family. She goes to the ATM and she empties out her bank account, about, I think, like $280 or something. Then she goes to the liquor store, buys way too much booze for just one person. And I think in both of those situations, although I don't know for sure if we've seen all the video from the liquor store, but she's by herself in both of those locations. So, and then she drives north into the White Mountains of New Hampshire, about a 2.5-hour drive, I think, 2 hours, 45 minutes. And I've driven it. Other people have driven it. And there seems to be about a half an hour to 45 minutes that's missing. Like, she could have made it to the scene of the accident about a half an hour, 45 minutes sooner than she actually made it there. So the question is, did she stop and get something to eat somewhere? Did somebody see her there and follow her, is one theory. But in my mind, that supports that sighting at the grocery store, where they stopped and she was with friends and they bought booze. And right across from the grocery store is a McDonald's. And there was also a sighting of her at that McDonald's with a couple girls.
There's a story about her being at work a few days before and getting a strange phone call. Do you think that could have anything to do with why she disappeared?
Yeah, so when you start plotting out what happened to Maura Murray, most of the timeline goes all the way back to the Thursday night before her disappearance. And she had a job working as campus security, and she would be at this dorm, and she would check IDs as people came in. And that Thursday night before her disappearance, she had what is explained by her manager as a complete nervous breakdown. Her manager went to check on her, and she was just almost catatonic. And the only thing she would say is, "my sister." And if you go back and look at her phone records, she did have a call with her sister, Kathleen, at about 10 o'clock that night. But after that, the last call she received was actually from her boyfriend, Bill. And they spoke prior to this breakdown. So I've always thought that whatever set her over the edge happened during that conversation with her boyfriend, not with her sister.
It was a little bizarre. When we first heard that Maura had sent an email to professors saying, "There's a death in the family, I have to take off for a week."
Not really like her, but if something was going on, she did need to get away, then kind of explains it. Why she didn't call one of us, I don't know. I mean, maybe we could have helped her out.
And so after she goes missing, people go and check her apartment to see what it looked like and if it had any clue as to where she was going. And there are a few strange things in her apartment, wasn't there? So I believe there was a letter to her boyfriend?
Yes. So she had the single dorm room in Kennedy Hall. And the police have said she packed everything up and it appeared she was never going to come back. Photographs of the scene suggest that maybe that's a little bit of an exaggeration. Not everything was packed up. There was still some stuff left out, but there were boxes on her bed that had been packed. And on top of those boxes was an email. And the email was from Bill, her boyfriend, to her, in which he says, essentially, "Yes, I cheated on you." And it was his admission that he had been unfaithful. So the detective in charge of the case looked at that and considered it almost a note that she had left behind. Like whoever was going to have to clean out her room, this was somewhat of an explanation of why she had run away.
So what we've got is all this information before, and then she disappears into thin air. Is it possible that she just walked away? That she walked away from the scene because she was going to get in trouble? Perhaps she wanted to end her own life because she appeared to be in crisis in the days before. Is that a possible ending?
Sure, anything is possible at this point. I find it unlikely for a couple reasons. One, if that's what happened, we also have to believe she didn't tell anybody about her plans that day, because none of her friends have come forward to say, oh yeah, she told me she was going to drive up into the White Mountains and everything. And they've never come forward. And I think a better motive for them to remain silent is either fear or obligation to protect her. So we'd have to believe she didn't tell anybody. And we have to believe that she walked away in such a way that somehow we've never found the body or the backpack or anything with her. There's not really any credible sightings of her walking away. And again, no footprints. The scent ended in the middle of the road, suggesting she got a ride. So there's a lot of points against it.
Now, I've read a few theories about the bus driver because, you know, he's the last one of the last people who sees her. And there's some theories about some suspicious behaviour. Is there any chance that he was potentially implicated in it?
I really don't think so. He's certainly somebody the police, looked at for sure. You know, they're going to look at anybody who was the last person to see a woman who went missing. But if he had anything to do with it, he acted extremely stupidly for a suspect, because the first thing he does is go home and tell his wife to call the police. You know, if he had anything to do with their disappearance, why would he want the police there? Also, you know, he had a lot of health issues. I don't know that he could have overpowered Maura, even if she were drunk. You know, Maura went through West Point. She's a trained military cadet. She went through training. She had, you know, she could shoot the guns on, on a tank. She knew how to operate a tank. So she wasn't just some young woman who was easily overpowered. She was a very strong young woman.
When you were putting your book together, did you speak to her family at all?
I spoke to many members of her family. I tried to speak to them all. They were very much against any book being written about the case. The first person I tried to contact was her father through a spokesperson. And he got right back to us and said, no, I don't want any book written about my daughter. And for me, especially, you know, having kids of my own, that was a red flag, and it made me more interested. And that's how, you know, I thought to start requesting records on her. And, you know, because at the time we only knew Maura as this perfect all-American girl, you know, no faults. And of course, when you start peeling back the layers, you find all this stuff. And she was in trouble with the law, and, you know, she had a lot of hang-ups, and, you know, but so does everybody at that age. If my daughter were to go missing, I would open my door and say, you know, please have at it. Help us find her. That wasn't the way they responded. And it's always been odd, you know, but eventually I did speak to her sister, Julie. I spoke to her brother, Kurt. I even spoke to her brother, Fred Jr. The only one I really didn't speak to was Kathleen, because I couldn't find her. She was homeless at the time. So this is a family deeply rooted in Eastern Massachusetts. They're very private people, and you can understand that. But they, you know, there's a lot that they didn't want out and discussed in public.
Did any of them think that maybe she'd chosen to disappear, or did they think something more sinister had happened to her?
The short answer is yes. You know, but of course, the first thing her father thought, the first thing he told police was that he believed his daughter was suicidal at the time of her disappearance, or may have been suicidal. He's walked that back a little bit since then, but that's what he told police then. And then the brother, Kurt, believed at the time that she had run away, and he had written a song about, you know, Maura, why did you run away? Why did you do this to us? So, you know, I think at the beginning, you know, foul play was not at the top of their list. You know, there were other explanations. I think those explanations are much more likely than foul play even to this day.
They searched with dogs, by air, and on foot. They've checked everything from bus logs to snow tracks, and now, after 10 days, officials say they have suspended the ground search for 21-year-old Maura Murray.
What we wanted to do is make sure that we had done everything twice. and wanted to be able to come, for instance, and say to the family, we have searched this area extensively, and we have a very good feeling that we've done everything that we can do to assure that she's not in the vicinity of the crash site.
Because if she ran away, am I right in saying that there's been no credit card use, or there's been no signs of her going on? Like, she would have had to forge an entirely new identity, wouldn't she?
She would, yes. There's been no sign of any of that. I was contacted at some point by a representative of a battered woman's shelter, a very popular one in the New England area. And she explained to me the way in which these women can go to that shelter and ask for help if they're in an abusive situation. And they can provide them with a new name and social security number, to their risk too. They could get in trouble for doing this, but they do it. I wondered, and I still wonder, if that person reached out to me because they had more information and because they knew Maura had done this. So that's one possibility. And that's what I hope happened. I hope that she did that, because that would mean she's alive and maybe she's found happiness somewhere. The more time goes by, the more I think that's unlikely. But one of the last calls that she made, and I don't think enough is made about this little clue, one of the last people she called was a social worker who worked in Weymouth, which is where her father lived at the time. And this woman's job was to investigate allegations of child abuse. So what's Maura doing calling this woman who has the connections in these organizations that can make women disappear? What's she doing calling her before she goes missing?
Do we have any details of the contents of that call?
No, I've reached out to the woman. She tells me she doesn't remember the conversation. I tend to believe her. The phone record suggests that phone call lasted, I think, only a minute or two. So it couldn't have been very detailed. She said it wasn't out of the question that, a lot of former clients of hers will keep in touch and reach out at times.
I think we never thought it would go past a few days. We just thought eventually she'd turn up and there'd be answers, and maybe she'd have a great story to tell after the fact. Some adventure happened. Never thought that we'd just have more questions than answers. So this is Maura's last email to the group of girls. She writes, "Dane Cook is playing at UMass, and we went to get tickets and it was sold out. I missed out again. But I did some research and he plays in Storrs, Connecticut, February 12th. She points out that it's February 12th, so it would be 3 days after she actually went missing. So to me, it shows that that's not someone who is trying to take off permanently. She wouldn't just make plans and then completely ditch them in our minds.
So, given what you know and all the research you've done and the people that you've spoken to, what is your sort of final theory on what happened to Maura Murray?
Well, I look at probability, and I can't say that I know what happened to her. I'm not going to say I know what happened to Maura Murray. But to me, the most probable explanation at this point, given everything we know, is that she made it to her destination the night of the disappearance. She made it to a cabin or a condo or somewhere where she wanted to stay with a friend. And maybe the next day, the friend drives back to UMass and leaves Maura up there. And none of them know that she's quickly becoming a national missing persons case. They think, oh, she got in a wreck, they'll get the car later on in the week. And then I think it's possible that somebody that she knew and trusted, who was part of the search, found her before the police did and flew into a rage and killed her then. So I think it's possible that Maura died later in the week, and we're looking at the wrong time, we're looking at the wrong date, and we're looking at the wrong area. And that's why it's never been solved. So that, in my mind, is the most probable. And there's a lot of things that have happened in the last few years. The thing that's on my radar at the moment is her boyfriend at the time of the disappearance, this Bill Rausch. In March of this year, he was indicted by a federal grand jury, and he sits in D.C. He's charged with sex abuse, based on an encounter that happened in 2011 in Washington, D.C., where he attempted to rape a coworker. And this coworker, he also pushed down the escalator on the metro, which is like a 2-story tall escalator. In my mind, the only reason you'd push a woman down that escalator is to try to kill her. So there's also 4 other women that have come forward with similar allegations about this man who was Maura Murray's boyfriend at the time of her disappearance. So we know there's a rage monster inside this man. And you have to wonder, how much of that Maura saw. And at the very least, it gives her motive to get away from him.
When Maura went missing, there were many things that were said. One of the things was that, Maura has run off with another boyfriend. And Billy, was confronted with this, and he said, I hope she has. If she is with another young man, then she is safe.
And I suppose even if he were to have an alibi on the night that she disappeared, if they're looking at the wrong time, then in the days afterwards, he could be unaccounted for.
Exactly right. Yeah. I think, I don't think anybody's alibis mean anything anymore.
Yeah.
Because I think we're looking at the wrong date.
No, exactly right. It's really interesting. And I think the reason so many people can't look away from this case is because of the layers of mystery. There are just so many things that don't seem to make sense. And I suppose if she's ever found, then hopefully that will, offer some evidence as to what actually happened.
Absolutely. Yeah. Whether she's alive or dead or passed, eventually she'll be found, or some evidence will be found. Because again, we're talking, she disappeared in February in New Hampshire. The ground is like concrete, so if somebody did kill her, that body's out there someplace. I don't think she could have been buried. So, one day either a hunter's going to come across that body in a location that has never been searched, or she'll step forward and tell the rest of her story.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today. We really, really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you very much for having me on. Thank you.
A worn blue ribbon wraps the tree that Maura's car hit. The family planned to put a new one up this week. The constant media attention has stopped. The searches have ended. But those who were living in town in the winter of 2004 still remember.
There was no tracks or anything in the woods or anything like that in the snow, so she had to have stayed on the road.
I never had that feeling that it was a local person. I always felt as though she was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and somebody came along.
Many others feel Maura Murray is still out there, alive and well, having orchestrated her own disappearance. Search the internet and you'll find a number of blogs about Maura filled with theories and speculation.
Our office and the state police do receive some information from people. Unfortunately, none of that has turned out to be fruitful. We haven't received any credible sightings of Maura since the night she disappeared.
James Renner's book, True Crime Addict: How I Lost Myself in the Mysterious Disappearance of Maura Murray, can be found online via the link in the description of this episode. True Crime Conversations is a Mamma Mia podcast, hosted by me, Jessie Stevens. Our senior producer and editor is Elise Cooper. If you liked this episode, you can join the True Crime Conversations Facebook group. Just search True Crime Conversations or click the link in the notes of this episode. True Crime Conversations will be back next week, looking at crimes through the eyes of those that know the most about them.